Hello, and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. I wanted to wish you all a happy new year. This is the start of 2023, season 2 for the Kink Perspective, kicking it off. Going to be tackling a few more tough or issues I kind of shied away from, just because I believed there wasn't necessarily. It's not that there's not bad information or good information. It's not a case of good versus bad, but some subjects that, I don't have a lot of personal experience with, but I do understand how they affect people and they affect their emotions and everything that's behind it. So I think it's really valid that we start exploring some of these things. On today's show, I want to talk about the cons, the downsides, the things we don't really hear about in open marriages, in E&M or polydynamics. Pretty much kind of, they're all quite convoluted in their terminology, but they all run together. They're all quite similar. If you're an open marriage with multiple people, you're in multiple relationships, it's polyamorous. So, and I'm not here to debate terminology at all. That's not really what I'm after. What I really want to talk about, um, we often see in social media with the rise. First off, let me try this. Open marriage isn't a new concept. This didn't just pop around in the last decade and everyone's like, oh, wow, great. We're going to go live together with my entire collective in a commune. No, open marriage concepts have been around for a long, long time. Now, if we start to remember first that marriage has and always will be, well, not always will be, but marriage used to be an economic institution. Two people got their children together to unite the two houses or families or settle empire disputes, and it was an economic decision. And that's why we did it. Over time, we realized that if we got into relationships, that we found that these are the people that we really connected with and we wanted to be with, and we stayed with them for the rest of our lives. And we pair bonded. Um, I've seen the arguments and I've read the arguments about humans aren't monogamous creatures. I don't agree with that at all. I think that it becomes too easy for us to just say, "Oh well." I don't. I want to say that there are exceptions to this rule. That everybody's different. That not every open marriage is a train wreck, or every open marriage is going to end in disaster. Because I'm going to lay out some stats. I want to cover some of the con sides. But like I said, we see a lot of this shiny veneer of how happy we are, and there's 5 of us in our polycule, and my marriage is going great. Um, but that's a facade. And I want to call that what that is. It's really a facade. And especially when I see this inside of the lifestyle. When I see dominants who are running 4, 5, 6 different submissives, and then they're always courting somebody new. So right there, essentially, when I'm looking at all these things, so obviously I want to tie this into the about the pro or the lifestyle. What's the purpose ultimately of marriage or a relationship? It teaches us to see our partner. It teaches us to understand them at their face, to take them at their worst, to accept them for their best, to not fall in love. And I love that little phrase. I've used it all my life, but I really have changed this adage to grow in love with this person you're with, because the longer you're with them, the more you learn um, that who they are and what you're about and how you mesh together, the more that love in theory should grow with them, because that whole essence, that purity, that baseline of a relationship of why we're connected is because we can see them for who they are behind the closed doors, when we're not at the clubs, when we're not going to the dungeons or the play parties, and they're not dressed up in their best attire. are in and they're not wearing their collars, the times that they're sick and that they're at home and we're taking care of them. Those words, I love you, I appreciate you, I see you for who you are, it really means we have formed this bond moving forward that we're committing to one another. And we have to understand that intimacy is much more difficult to keep going the longer we're in a relationship, but it doesn't have to be. So, the first thing we start to look at, and by the way, the prevalence of open marriages, let's throw out some stats. So, we're going to look at the United States, we're going to look at Australia, we'll look at North America, so the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the UK. In the United States, in North America alone, so United States and Canada, about 12% of all marriages have reported, and this is a little on the high side, so I'm gonna actually even round it up a touch higher, so crazy Canadians over there. About 15% of all marriages in North America, so United States and Canada, have all reported trying or being involved in an open marriage. And people might be surprised. Well, that's a relatively low number. But if you take the amount of people, so we have about 330 million plus in the United States, and you have about another 30 million in Canada. You've got 300, almost 400 million people. So that's over 40 million people. What 50 million people involved in open relationships, and they're out and I've seen some interviews with people out of Washington State or Oregon, and some out of Manitoba up in Canada or British Columbia. And I remember one that stuck out to me. There was this woman, and she was in an open marriage, and she would gush because of her, not because of her nesting partner, which is what she called it. So her husband. She wasn't gushing over her husband. She was gushing over the feelings of somebody new. And they filmed this and this new relationship she was involved in and all this cuddling and stuff. And you looked at the surroundings that they were in, and you kind of get this sense, like when I looked at her husband, so emasculated, so on the edge, even confronted by the question of, are you sure you're okay with this? It was almost like I'm looking at a captive, someone who is kind of fallen in with their captors, and someone who's just taken by the gaze, because it's either join that side or be out on your own, which is a scary proposition in on itself, right? And I want to make this clear. I'm not trying to bash open marriages. I'm not doing that. But I want to talk about the things because, there was all these emotions that get wrapped up involved in it: jealousy, anxiety, fear, finances, timing, stress. And these are all the things that a lot of these people, when I read their stories about how wonderful the open life is, leave out. I kind of make it comparable to when we're looking at the lifestyle itself, when we're looking at, dominance and submission. People tend to see the fantasy without realizing the work. And I'm not saying, again, open marriages, if that's what works for you, wonderful. But then you very well know how much work has to go into supporting your partner, supporting your external relationships, your jobs if you have children, and who's making time and what holds the most priority, who's not being selfish, and all of these things kind of tornado or avalanche altogether. And as they do, it tends to be, much more convoluted and becomes more difficult to start maintaining all these. And in the meantime, your primary relationship, that open marriage that you have, it almost starts to feel like, oh, well, it's a little bit of, you know, I kind of take it for granted. I take that other person for granted because they understand too. They have their other partners too. But really, did you get together initially because the whole point, the you loved each other, but you don't want to commit because your male partner doesn't satisfy you sexually? Okay, well, over time that changes, and sex with any partner changes. Because that first year that we're together with somebody, we're in that honeymoon phase. We're having sex in the coat room closet at our friend's house. We're in the bathroom or on the car ride home. But then we move into our intimacy stage, and the sex is more meaningful. The act of intimacy is much more romantic. And so we seem to be losing sight that when we enter these things, we lose that soul to soul connection, that connectivity to that other person. And we look at these things, we have to understand that what a marriage is and is it's not about being, it's not about fulfillment. A lot of people, I tend to hear this all the time, that marriage is about need fulfillment, that I've got to have my needs met constantly. Tell me at any given point where the dispenser of love is, like on demand. If your TV, you go over to and you want to watch a movie and it's on demand, where is the button for on demand loved? Marriages don't fill that hole inside of you just because you think you deserve it. And the reality is when people have this perception, you end up setting the tone and creating the perfect recipe for a broken marriage. A struggle between the two, you and your partner, or worst case scenario, someone begins to cheat. Someone looks outside because somebody else just gets me and they understand me. Why is it she just doesn't get me? Yeah, I leave my clothes on the bed, but and she's always yelling at me when I'm being the asshole and not realizing my wife's working too. Or why is it, he never cooks and he never does anything, and you know um, I need a man that will just see me for me and want to make love to me every day. Well, that's just not. None of these things are reality. None of these things are a reality. We don't live in a dystopian utopia in the future. We're not communists, right? Where everybody's kind of working together and then somehow it's going to be equally distributed. That's just never going to happen. Love when I read that stuff, by the way, and I'm making fun of somebody specific. Um, you have to understand that when you're committed to your partner, you both are competing to get your needs met. If that's something you think you're doing, you're straining the marriage, right? Because at that only given moment, all you're doing is saying, me, 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 this is all about me. And if you don't get me, I'm going to get it from somebody else. And then they're going to agree with you. Fine, I'll get it from somebody else. Here's a good stat for most of you who tell me, oh, well, um, open marriages, there isn't a lot of research. In psychological terms, there's not. There is research out there. But for the most part, in North America, the eye-watering number of open marriages end terribly, and they end in divorce, and they are usually a nightmare. Now, so this number is tracked to the courts, and they end up getting tallied as far as are they monogamous relationships, or they're starting to document different types of marriages. So from a lawyer that I had been looking at that speaks about this, 92% of all open marriages in North America, right? That's a lot of people. So 400 million, so we talked about that earlier, 50 million people, 92% of that. So we're talking over 40 million people who just get into it. It fails within 5 years. And it's catastrophic failure. And we don't take the time to understand some of the things that cause it to go wrong, what these disadvantages are, because we believe that if we end up not solving the problem with the person that we're with, that we're going to find that solution through somebody else. But let me tell you, it's not going to that's why it never just stops with one. Well, this person's giving me attention and love, but they suck at sex. So I'll go over to this guy over here who's my stud, and I can have sex with him for 4 hours. But he's got the emotional range of a tune-up or a turn-up, sorry. And I can't talk to him about anything. But I've got my husband at home who takes care of my needs and he pays our bills and he's a wonderful father. That's great. So you've got three people in your life fulfilling some of your needs until you end up having another need that none of those three can fulfill. And I tend to challenge and I like to ask people, and I want to ask you, for some of you who may hate on me for bringing this to light, but what about looking in on yourselves? What part of you feels the need that you found somebody, and unless it was a joint decision, you've convinced somebody to go and open up your marriage, but you wooed them, you courted them, you dated them for a year, 2, 3 years, decided to get married, maybe you have kids, you've got 5 years invested, and then you decided somewhere along the way, this isn't for me. I want an open marriage. You're hearing that from the outside, because my needs aren't being met. My wife said she would always, or my in a civil union, right? My partner said that they would try being a submissive, and I've got them books and I've shown them videos, and they're not, because there's now apprehension. We've created that tension. So if I don't do this for you, you're going to leave me, or it's going to cause more fights. Or you're going to find somebody else. So the first thing we're going to look at is fear inside of an open marriage. And it's a reality. And one of the drawbacks with an open relationship is this emotional whirlwind that we don't often hear about. And what you have to understand is when you're first broaching this subject, you're creating anxiety and panic and stress in somebody else's life because of your needs. So if your needs outweigh the needs of somebody else, then why stay with them? If you're staying with them because you want to be with them, but you don't care how they're going to feel, you're being selfish and you're being harmful. And we talk about this in a lifestyle when we talk about consent. Well, I don't want to be in a relationship. I don't want to be in a relationship then where I can't get what I want. Then don't stay in it. Relationships do end. If you want to be a single person out there dating 50 people, that's fine. It's really what we used to call it back in my day. And I feel old for saying that, as I'm, in a couple of years away knocking on 50. But when I look back 30, 20 years ago, when I was in the dating scene hardcore, it was just dating. And I was open with people. Yep, I'm seeing 2 or 3 people. Nothing serious. I'm not committed to anyone. Nevertheless, you can't open up your marriage to be selfish and then allow anxiety and panic and stress to come to the other person and then ignore what you're doing to them. So moving along, I want to consider the next avenue of this. And we need to consider jealousy. And people will often say, well, I've talked it out. No one's going to be jealous. We know we've set all the rules and parameters. The one thing you can't count on is human emotion and the human condition, especially when we get attached to someone, or more so when someone is so insecure and they're suffering such low self-esteem, and then on top of that, now we've piled on that fear of uncertainty. What's going to happen when my partner goes off with somebody new? We often, then we hear about, okay, so like I'm working with a few poly families, and they're quite large and they're quite intricate, um, and these questions have been brought to me, and so it was something valid that I wanted to talk about. because a couple of, the primaries are married, and then there's, it begged the question, and what about, how do we think about the risk of disease? Because, again, now the open marriage, poly, E&M community, that whole community is quite separate from BDSM. While they're sharing in those activities, they're their own community. And while they know and probably vet each other, that is a valid concern for when you're starting to take partners on. And that's something that we have to understand, that when we are looking at these relationships and we're getting involved on an intimate or a physical level, that how much care that we put into them. And the more partners you have, the more, obviously, the more chances you elevate of transmitting or catching an STI. We need to really talk about as well, and it's probably should have been bumped more to number one, is the secrecy aspect. Without a solid foundation of trust and putting in established boundaries, it can be really tempting to start lying about seeing your other partner. Suddenly, you start finding yourself, you're wanting to spend more time with your secondary relationship than your primary relationship. And you start finding yourself getting angry or getting in little arguments and fights because you started out being truthful and talking about everything, and now all of a sudden you find yourself doing things in secret. I watched a show this past weekend. It was called Why Women Kill, and it was a quite interesting show. It had like Lucy Liu, and it was a timeline of in a house, the 1960s, the 1980s, and then finally the 2000s, and or in the 2020. And in the 2020 portion, it was a open marriage couple, and she eventually admitted to her husband that she, was very much had crossed their ethical lines of bringing the person home. It was supposed to never happen. Falling in love with the other person was never supposed to happen. So all of these crazy emotions and feelings. There's more to that show, but that was a really solid part. And we tend not to understand this, that your emotions, no matter how much you think you can control them, often at times change the way we think and feel. Now, think about all the insights too. Obviously, maybe it's not that main concern for everybody else, but if I've got to drive 45 minutes one direction to go and see my boyfriend, and then I've got to travel, come home and shower and change and go out with my wife, and then come back, and then later that night I'm going to spend that night at my girlfriend's, who's an hour away, but I don't, logistically, that's not easy. It adds to stress, which then even kind of lends segue into something else. It gets expensive dealing with somebody, dealing with multiple people. You got to go out. You're having dinners, which puts a financial stress. And people will say, "Oh, well, that's just dating." Sure, when it's one-on-one, that's quite confined. And you know what to expect when you're seeing one person. I know I might this Friday take them out for dinner, and Saturday night we might go to a game together or go to a club or whatever the case may be. But when you're doing that 5 nights a week, all of a sudden, that primary relationship, that's going to be your marriage is going to suffer because you're spending all of that money on all of these other relationships and not your primary relationship, which then comes back to, we have to talk, envy comes into it. You're doing all these things for other people that you don't do for your husband or your wife. And how do you think that's going to make them feel? And if you say, well, it doesn't matter, we've talked about it, then you're still entering the realm of selfishness. You can dress that up any way you like, but there is a reason figures don't lie. Now, this number from this attorney, that was quite high. But I have looked, like psychological studies, the numbers are still quite high. Their numbers were over 60% of open marriages. That was their lowest, with their highest number peaking somewhere around 82. So it's not combined. It's still quite a bit off. There's about a 30% difference in range, but there's still a lot of people that are failing. We have to consider too, when I'm meeting somebody new, I might meet this new maso because I'm a sadist, and we just click on paper about everything else. But then all of a sudden, I expect to see them 2 nights a week, and they're like, well, I want 5, and I want you staying here. But if all of a sudden the beliefs about my relationships and between my open relationship and my secondary or third relationships are different, then an open one can all of a sudden is going to start causing a lot of tension. There's going to be causing a lot of pain and hurt. Because then people, oh, I'm sorry tonight, I can't stay here with you, honey, because, I'm expected somewhere else. And we're neglecting because we've just taken on something new. And what we're showing to our married partner is that they don't matter as much. Regardless what somebody's telling you, that feeling is sitting there, even if it's in their unconscious. And everybody can sit there and tell me, oh, well, I've gone through this and I've done this, and I am the exception to the rule. You're not the exception to the rule. Because at the end of the day, you don't know what your partner is thinking. Especially when they're hurting. They're not going to tell you these things because they don't want to stand in the way of your happiness. Which then leads me to my next one. We're having these, existential crisis of being overwhelmed with all of the questions of, where do I fit inside of this relationship? What is my identity? And, not everyone in society is into open relationships or open marriages. It's not. And there's a reason it's not. It is a small portion of the global population that take part in open marriages. But there is this doubt that, people start to, your husband and your wife start to believe that, God, if the neighbors find out, I'm going to be ostracized. I'm not going to get invited to the pool parties or the block parties anymore. They're not going to want us around. That's fine. You can say, well, screw those people. I don't want to be with them if they're closed-minded. But for as willing and as accepted as you want to be in your lifestyle, you have to be willing to accept their belief that they believe that being pair bonded with one person, one or two people total, is how it should be. You can't have that both ways, which I tend to find is funny, and it goes for a lot of these arguments I come across that, well, this is just a matter of opinion, and whose opinion is right or wrong. Well, unless it's backed by proven fact, they're just opinion. And it's just a belief you want to hold on to. If you want to die on that hill, that's up to you. Where it starts to really get more complicated inside of the open marriages that we're seeing, there was, she's a family and a marriage and family therapist. She's been a practicing clinician for over 25 years, specializing in marriages and now branching out into open marriages. She's done numerous studies. Dr. Schwartz, she talked about how blocking our emotions and pretending that we're okay with an open relationships, we can deal with the good and the bad. The problem that ultimately happens is that we are highlighting and multiplying the stress and anxiety we now feel because we don't, again, it comes back to we don't want our partner to be disappointed. We don't want to lose them. So we're almost willing to sacrifice ourselves for their happiness. But then that's not a relationship. That's one-sided. And when we do this whole lack of vulnerability, the one thing that brought us together, can lead to mental health problems down the line. It can lead to emotional breakdowns. And more than likely, it's going to affect your primary relationship so much, you don't know where these breakdowns are going to happen. And if you don't talk about how you're feeling. And you have to be ready for the question if you're broaching the subject of an open marriage with your partner, what if they don't want to do it? What if they don't want to get involved with you? Then what do you do? Because if you don't have these discussions and you literally talk everything out and try to suss out every little nuance that you can possibly expect, you are sitting on a bomb that's just waiting to go off. And you have to, I was talking with someone today, you have to be prepared to ask a lot of these tough questions. Am I really doing this for us? Or is this what we really want? Or is it what I really want? Am I happy if I know that this is causing, even the smallest amount of discomfort to my partner because I need to be happy? Well, then that's selfishness. Where's the priority? What about them is the priority? And when we're talking about priority, when it comes to that, who's number one? How are you going to manage that time? Especially, like, let's say we throw children in there. You've got your husband and your wife. You have your kids. Then what? You have one, two, three different relationships going on. Who gets to see what? And not every one of those partners is going to be completely happy that, hey, you know what? I want to spend time with my kids. Yep, you can say, oh, well, that's fine. That'll never happen to me. However, you don't control human emotion. We don't know how things are going to affect us. And we have to understand that marriage doesn't, on any level, tolerate selfishness or neediness. Obviously, we know it doesn't tolerate disloyalty, because when that happens, right? I'm not saying you can't come back from infidelity, because there are ways. It's something I work on with my clients that have suffered at the hands of infidelity in a relationship. But when we're talking real disloyalty, it punishes the whole institution, the whole sanctity of why you got married together in the first place. It punishes those who refuse to abide by its demanding rigor of honor and respect and integrity, personal responsibility, emotional intimacy, emotional intelligence, emotional vulnerability, being honest, making a commitment to somebody else. That our words and our expressions and our acts of growth of love towards them actually mean something. Those things become changed once you've been married long enough and you're now telling your partner it's not enough. When we look at this, when we look at what a marriage won't take, and you compare this side by side with what you look at in an open marriage, you have to almost look at it like it doesn't make any sense, right? Unlike the goal of an open marriage, which the focus is on meeting someone's individual needs, what they want in the moment, that they need their desires filled at the expense of the marital unity, that commitment that they got into with somebody. A monogamous, whether that is heterosexual or homosexual marriage, focuses on the individual growth within that committed relationship, and not at the expense of that protected and safe space of the marriage itself. Now, this doesn't exactly work when we're talking about, again, let's say two people married within the lifestyle that are maybe sharing a submissive. Because that becomes a little bit different, because it depends how far you've let them into your family. But I'm more really talking about once you've opened it up to a lot more partners, right? So we have to understand that to want to attain the heights of reciprocity in a marriage, it takes a lot of work. And it takes not a lot of work just for the marriage itself, but it takes a lot of, you require a lot of onus to make that marriage work. You have to put in your effort. When I talk about effort in the lifestyle, about doing research and going to classes and practicing at home, it's not about just simply giving a command, spanking an ass, and moving forward and thinking you're the next Christian Grey or Anastasia or whatever the hell you believe in this deluded fantasy of the lifestyle. And that's my analogy to this. You can't be deluded in the thought that, hey, you know what? I was really happy and we were having sex 5 times a week, and he brought me flowers every day, and well, she cooked me dinner every night. Now, well, she's got a job or he's got a more demanding job, whatever the case may be. Both parties are working more, and oh well, I'm not getting dinner or I'm not getting flowers, I'm going to get it from somebody else because I need that. You have to ask yourself, when you're starting to say those words, you have to reflect on what it truly means, because you're risking everything you said once you head down this path. And the moment that you're standing there facing it on this precipice, you're holding your breath, you're not blinking, and you come to the conclusion that your partner, that their needs are nowhere close to your order of needs as your own. And that's a really difficult precipice to be on. It's a really difficult mountain to climb down from. It can be. But I mean, if you're going to stand there and look down and say, oh, no, I need this and I don't care what they need, you're setting yourself up for disaster. You're setting yourself up, even if you think an open marriage is the way to go, you're setting yourself up for failure. And it's going to hurt. And you're going to do a lot of emotional damage to somebody else. Now, I'm not here to pick on. I really want to end this today and say I'm not saying all these things because I think that all open marriages are a bad idea. It's not for me. That doesn't mean it doesn't work for other people. But I guarantee you, if you interview or if you sit and talk with them, they talk about all of the struggles and a lot of the things that I've mentioned today, and they're constantly working and evolving their primary relationship. If everybody could do an open marriage, if everybody could be polyamorous or practice ethical non-monogamy, everybody would do it. You have to sit there and reflect for a moment why not everybody's doing it. Because not all of us are built that way. And eventually you run into the person who just wants to be monogamous. And then what? Now you've got a conflict of interest going on. You don't know how that's going to make you feel. You don't know what it's going to do to your... There's all of these things that we need to consider. Now, again, I have a couple of good friends, people that I've talked to, that I'm close to. And this isn't a reflection on anybody when I'm decided to question this today, to talk about this today. This isn't a reflection on any of them. But I think it is valid point that we have to stop saying, oh, poly is the way, opening up my marriage is the way, and it's going to save and do everything for us, and we're going to just live a happy life. If some of the things that I covered today can't be answered or are answered by somebody's needs first, you really have to reconsider what you're doing in that relationship in the first place. Other than that, you are setting yourself up to fail. You're setting yourself up to hurt. You're setting yourself up to harm somebody emotionally. And that's not fair. That's just selfishness. So, with that said, I'd look forward to some of your thoughts. I'm going to have the discussion board open on this. I know this is going to be a hotbed of a topic. But I feel for everybody who throws out there that, that's out in social media talking about their open marriage and what a just blessing it is and how easy it is and there is no issues. I'm saying they're full of shit. That's just not a reality. It doesn't just work that way. You're telling me that everything just falls perfectly in your life, and your wife's getting 40 guys a week, and you're hitting up all the young 18-year-old girls, and everything is copacetic, and no one is jealous, no one is pissed. When you stop to think about that statement, it just sounds ridiculous in nature. But that's what's purported by a lot of people on social media. How well, and they're taking these fully manicured photos and they have this really glossy veneer. And what inspired me to talk about this today is because I saw there's somebody I follow, and there's somebody, they knew I was going to talk about this, and they're in a very public, on a couple of BDSM websites, very public open marriage. But I happened to catch a photo of somebody, and I was looking at the eyes of this person. The smile was there. Everything about the face would have told you that this one partner was happy. But it was what was behind the eyes of that person. And they were miserable and dying and hurting and in pain, but had never admitted it. And now they're off in counseling, and they're working on their solutions, whether it's going to continue or not. I just wish them the best that they can do for themselves, and to be happy and healthy and honest. But when we become so oblivious to everyone else around us by just trying to fulfill our needs, then it's not honest anymore. Then it's just a lie you're telling yourself, that because all you want to do at that point is just pay attention to your own needs and no one else's. I know it's a lot to think about, and like I said, I want to hear some feedback, good, bad, or indifferent. If you think I'm wrong, let's hear about it, or let's talk. Let's open up a dialogue and start really talking more through the glassy veneer of what is an open relationship or an open marriage. Until next time, everyone, be safe and stay kinky.